Tears for Fears didn't quite fit in. Not style conscious enough to be new romantic, but two smash hits to be the next Joy Division. Not quite a synth pop band, more a pop band that used synthesizers. Before U2 took over, Roland Orzabal and Kurt Smith were briefly the biggest band in the world, claiming 2 US Billboard #1s, with a shuddering sonic maelstrom, questioning authority, and a slice of Cold War paranoia with the vibe of the Boys of Summer. But before that, they were the po-faced therapy boys, drowning their sorrow and dancing to the sound of their own childhood trauma. This is New British Canon, and this is the story of Mad World. Roland Orzabal and Kurt Smith met in Bath at the age of 13. Both had grown up in not ideal circumstances, both on council estates with absent fathers. Orzabal's mother had moved the family from Plymouth to get away from her abusive husband, while Smith dealt with his parental neglect by getting into trouble, stealing for attention. But music was a way out. Orzabal played guitar and assembled various teenage bands around him, recruiting Smith as bassist after having heard him sing along to Blue Oyster Cult. By the age of 18, they had cycled through folk and heavy metal, and were now in an era appropriate for 1979 mod revival 5-piece called Graduate. Catch me if you can. I won't record no backhander. They were signed to Pi Records and recorded their debut. Lead single Costello Tribute, Elvis Should Play Ska, was a chart disappointment in the UK, not making the top 75, but still was a top 10 hit in Spain. Tell me you're the pop commander, Elvis should play ska. By the release of their album Acting My Age in 1981, the band was over. Orzabal and Smith hated the long-haul tours trapped in minivans, but also the lopsided band democracy, where the 3 non-songwriting band members often made the bulk of the decisions. Plus, the new mod wave was petering out. They needed a new direction. When we left Graduate, we were 19. And there were 3 pivotal records that really influenced the way we were going forward. Peter Gabriel's 3rd album, Remaining Light by Talking Heads, and Scary Monsters by David Bowie. And Gary Newman was a big influence in the sense that you could actually make records without a band. The most exciting pop music of the new decade was synth pop. It sounded like the future, and traditional rock and roll band structure could be ignored. Many made do with only 2 members. Usually the dynamic was the singer up front and the synth boffin behind. Though at the time still on the dole, the 2-piece couldn't afford the equipment they needed to live their synth pop ambitions. However, they found their salvation in a vegetarian disco. We were very lucky that we met Ian Stanley back in the day at Mole's Club. He had a Roland Jupiter 4, a Roland CR78 drum machine, an MXR pitch transposer, and a 4 or 8-track tape machine. So I then started to arrange stuff on those machines, but the songs were written. In those days, songs were written before their arrangement. Lyrically, the music they were writing wasn't the usual love songs. They were sourced from their distressing pre-adulthoods and the work of US psychologist Arthur Janoff. After being called History of Headaches for perhaps 2 hours, they named themselves Tears for Fears after a musing in Janoff's 1980 book, Prisoners of Pain. The idea that children manifest monsters and nightmares in their imagination to deal with sadness. One of their first songs, Suffer the Children, is based on the idea that when a child is born, it is a blank slate. That their personality is formed solely from everything they experience in life. A bad childhood results in adult neuroses. As both of them had had disjointed adolescences, they were attracted to Janoff's theories. It is a very teenage reaction to blame your own fucked upness on your parents. Part of the reason they started a band was so they could afford Janoff's primal therapy. Yet pop music based on Janoff's work wasn't without precedent. The first Plastic Ono Band album shows John Lennon working through his issues with his parents. While a Scottish rock band later named themselves after his primal scream therapy. Attracting the attention of Dave Bates of Mercury Records, the band was signed in 1981 and released 2 non-charting singles, Suffer the Children and the thematically similar Pale Shelter. When you don't give me love, you give me pale shelter. You don't give me love. But for Mercury to continue working with the band, Tears for Fears needed a hit. Orzabel lived in a small flat above a pizza place in the centre of Bath. Every day when his wife went off to work, Orzabel sat at home on the dole, trying to conjure his muse. But it was this, looking out of his window to the commotion of capitalism, combined with Duran Duran on the radio, that sparked the idea for a song. We're known as a synthesizer group, but back then I just had an acoustic guitar. I've not told many people this, but I was listening to Radio 1 on this tinny radio, and Duran Duran's Girls on Film came on. I just thought, I'm gonna have a crack at something like that. I did, and ended up with Mad World. Taking the basic rhythm of Girls on Film for his new song, he formed a lyric about the chaos of the workaday world, one he felt very separate from. This was tied together with the anxiety he had experienced while at school. As well as a general feeling of hopelessness that had pervaded his life since the end of Graduate. One of the most impactful lines resides in the chorus, one that seems terminally morbid, but in fact is further influence from Janoff. The line, "The dreams in which I'm dying are the best I've ever had," that comes from Janoff and his primal scream theory. I remember reading once that your most powerful dreams, in essence the ones that are life-threatening dreams, are the ones that release the most tension. I found that myself when I was 18, 19. Certainly I had some pretty vivid dreams, and I always woke up rather refreshed. The song's name, Mad World, was inspired by a line by Liverpool synth poppers, Dalek I Love You. Yes, I believe the world's gone. I believe that the world's gone mad. It's a very, very mad world. Mad World was destined to be the B-side of Pale Shelter, before Bates told them they should re-record it and release it as their next single. The hope was that such a quirkily depressed song would act as a calling card, draw some credibility in press, so that future singles could become hits. Though the song was written in an afternoon, as soon became a recurring motif for Tears for Fears, the process of recording it took a while. Now working with former Adam the Ants drummer and Dalek I Love You producer, Chris Hughes, Tears for Fears experimented to no end with Mad World, adding ominous tones and its drip-dropping bloops that were impossible to recreate with an acoustic guitar. All around me are familiar faces, worn-out places. By the end, its original Girls on Film tempo had been slowed significantly, and when he realised his more full-bodied shout was ill-fitting, Smith's more melancholic voice was subbed in to convey Orzabel's tale of alienation. The plan of Mad World accruing Tears for Fears and Cool Points was rumbled almost immediately by the boys in Tears for Fears being obviously not very cool. They were too introspective to be part of the London New Romantics, and not fatalistic enough to fit in with the dour post-punk of Manchester. In interviews with the more serious side of the UK music press, they talked at length about Janoff and Primal Therapy, and so were tagged as being so very serious and po-faced. As such, they soon tired of the press. It was all interviewers wanted to talk about, and we were stupid enough to go along with that. And of course, because we felt very strongly about it. The media really went out of their way to highlight a dull and serious image for us. And being honest, we were to blame as well. We never made much of an effort to let people get to know us after that. We didn't see the point. After 6 weeks on the UK charts, Mad World peaked at number 3 at the beginning of November 1982 and stayed there for 3 weeks. Held off the top spot by Culture Club, Eddie Grant and Dionne Warwick. Their Top of the Pops appearance lost them further cool points, with the band's vests and Smith's braided mullet losing the battle with 80s fashion. I think we were cool for 5 minutes, until we went on Top of the Pops really. John Peel was playing us. We did sessions with John Peel when nobody had really seen us. But then if you sign to a major label, 2 young pretty boys, they're going to push you into doing the poster pop as well. And at that point, you're going to lose a lot of people. Wanting to be taken seriously but not, the band spent far too long on their debut album. From their sessions of Mad World to release was about 9 months, whereas with Graduate they'd recorded their whole album live. With Tears for Fears they were more interested in using the studio as an instrument, going deep on the production side like Talking Heads, Bowie and Gabriel had. But this willingness to experiment alongside Orzabel's perfectionism stood in the way of completing anything. When we recorded The Hurting, we were very precious and overindulgent. It got to the point where we didn't want to put anything on tape. There was so much indecision, married with a lack of vision. Everything had to be dead right, and consequently we got lots of things wrong. On the most avant-garde track, The Prisoner, amongst nightmarish synth choirs, the duo tried to replicate the sinister whispering under the vocal that Gabriel used on Intruder. Synthetic voices, horns and strings pervade the album. Opener and what became the title track, The Hurting, recalls Joy Division with its reverb drums and melodic bass line. Roland's words signposting the album's obsessions. Childhood trauma, parental neglect, and especially Arthur Janoff. Because it was such an alien topic, no one really understood it, nor did they understand that it was a major part of the force behind the band. His influence was massive on the songs. Ideas as Opiates is a chapter in one of his books. Prisoners of Pain is another one of his books. That system of psychology enabled me to write about my emotions. The Hurting was released in March 1983, entering the UK chart at number 2 before knocking Michael Jackson's Thriller from the top spot the week after. Their appeal was singular, in an era of glamorous new romantics on yachts. Tears for Fears were still cute smash hits cover stars, but they were creating synth pop as therapy. Normally, you're either a critically acclaimed band that are pretty deep, or you're a pop band, and never the twain shall meet. But we achieved that. We had the Screaming Girls, which is the pop side, and we had people analysing our lyrics. College kids who were deeper thinkers appreciated us, so it was a weird mixture and people didn't quite understand. As The Hurting spawned 3 top 5 singles and went platinum in the UK, Mercury wanted the follow-up LP as soon as possible. But swift music making is not in Tears for Fears' wheelhouse. A hurriedly produced stopgap single was the compromise. Released in December 1983, The Way You Are is a rhythmic tangle of overlapping recurring motifs, defying traditional song structure. In Record Mirror, Orzabel had stated his fondness for Malcolm McLaren's hip-hop pastiche, Buffalo Gals, and it embodies a similar circular songlessness as this Tears for Fears single, perhaps an unconscious influence. Problem was that not only did the single flop by their standards, topping out at number 24 on the UK chart, but the band ended up disowning it pretty sharpish. We recorded the single and it wasn't very good. I mean, I don't think it was very good. All this clever sort of thing. It was all cross rhythms, that sort of thing. Yet the average Joe public wouldn't understand it because it's just not a good song. But the way we tried to do it was to make it a good song by using clever techniques, which people didn't understand. Though The Way You Are was by most metrics a failure, it pointed to Tears for Fears' future, casting off the majority of their Primal Therapy trappings, and writing something a bit more extroverted. When it did arrive, their next album wouldn't be full of navel-gazing self-analysis, but widescreen, self-assured anthems. The label proposed release date for Tears for Fears' next album was the end of July 1984. They would miss this deadline by 7 months, it eventually surfacing in February 1985. That album was Songs from the Big Chair, named after a miniseries called Sybil, where Sally Field plays a young woman with 16 different personalities. Mentally scarred by her mother, the only place she could truly be herself is in the big chair, speaking to her analyst. She felt safe, comfortable, and wasn't using her different faces as a defense. It's kind of an up yours to the English music press, who really fucked us up for a while. This is us now, and they can't get at us anymore. I feel that strongly about it because it did affect me so much. And of course, there's no way of getting back at them. The majority recording took place at Ian Stanley's house, where the band had now installed a 24-track studio, complete with Fairlight. Though it took longer to make Songs from the Big Chair than The Hurting, the process on the whole was less stressful. The creative core of Orzabel, producer Chris Hughes, and now keyboardist Stanley, doing most of the compositional heavy lifting. Orzabel soon learned that anything recorded after midnight was usually of a poor quality due to tiredness. At the same time, Smith popped in and out, providing suggestions. Shout was one of the few songs written after the sessions began. Shout, shout, let it all out. Orzabel had sat down in that same Mad World-inspiring flat, now with a small synthesizer and a drum machine, and attempted to program a Romanian light drum loop. Atop this, he bashed out a chorus, a maddeningly circular chorus, repeated as mantra. Come on, I'm talking to you. Come on. He felt he'd made a start on an adequate album track, though when he played it to Hughes and Stanley, they smelt a potential hit. In a way, the overall structure of Shout wasn't that different from the flop, The Way You Are. Both are epic tracks with overlapping sections. The verses bleed into the choruses and vice versa. One of the big differences is Shout is more bombastic. The Emu drumulator beat aids in this, because John Bonham's drum sound is colossal. Joined by a keyboard stand battering session. and some thunderous fills supplied by the man previously known as Merrick. For the longest time, the song lacked words for the verses, as the team were more than happy to let the chorus loop infinitely. Similar to Mad World, the initial spark was easy, but the track took an age to complete. It was a long piece. The original recording was 7 minutes long, but it got chopped down a bit. There were guitar solos in it. Up until then, there weren't many synth bands putting in guitar solos. It was a long track that we built piece by piece, by putting another verse on it and expanding the middle section. There was another little synthesizer break thing, which Roland came in a few days later and said, "We need to put this in, we need to punctuate it, and break the track up." So we would come in and do bits and pieces for months. Due to their previous press identity, when Shout was released, many assumed that the band was doing another Janoff thing, that was about Primal Scream psychotherapy. It's in fact about protest. Orzabel concerned about the Cold War, US nuclear missiles being installed in the UK. And how one should make some noise and use your voice, as your voice has power. It showed that Tears for Fears were now looking beyond their internal lives for material. Hughes had made Orzabel and Smith listen to a lot of Steely Dan, Bruce Springsteen, and Bryan Adams. It not only expanded their horizons, it allowed the band to be unafraid to make big-sounding music that could translate over to the US. Recording The Big Chair was a process of the band becoming less obtuse and more commercial. That influence came from our producer, Chris Hughes. I had lots of artistic tantrums and didn't want to make any money, and then I got a gas bill. The approach of, this is going to be big, was healthy. It made the music communicate. We didn't get up our asses. Well, maybe once. Tears for Fears took influence from everywhere. I Believe was inspired by the fragile phrasing of Robert Wyatt.
Well, I ask you, I believe. The boy said that they're going to take me to task. But if you knew just what these tears were for.
The bass line for their atypical love song, Head Over Heels, took notes from Talking Heads' cover of Take Me to the River. While The Working Hour opens with an instrumental passage that has Ryuichi Sakamoto's score for Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence in mind. Its saxophone solo delivered by future half of Goldfrapp, Will Gregory. Forever letting Mercury's deadlines lapse, The Working Hour soulfully rages against the pressures they felt from their label. While there were things we were angry about, The Working Hour was talking about the amount of work we had to do after we were successful. This is The Working Hour. We'd realised we'd become a business, and that was certainly a complaint that we had. We'd been pulled in all directions, and that's hard in your early 20s to deal with. As the album was nearing completion, Mercury's Dave Bates felt that the band was missing a big international crossover song, what he described as a drive time single, a cruising down the highway with the top down and the radio blaring kind of track. They're the Boys of Summer. While recording Shout, Orzabel kept absent-mindedly playing 2 chords that caught Hughes' ear. The producer impressed on him that he should make it into a song. So Orzabel recorded a demo, those 2 chords with a Linn drum beat stitched together from the galumphing thump of Simple Minds' Waterfront. And the elegant shuffle of Lynx's Throw Away the Key. And then Orzabel thought nothing more of it. Unperturbed, Hughes kept playing it, until Orzabel's wife, Caroline, heard it and loved it. But didn't click until Orzabel replaced the original chorus lyric of Everybody Wants to Go to War with Everybody Wants to Rule the World. Some weeks later, he came in with basically the chorus line. From the day he came in with that chorus line, myself, Ian Stanley and Roland sat down and finished the whole thing in about a week. If you put up the 2-inch masters of that song now, it almost mixes itself. It's very straightforward. The song feels like a warm summer day, with its cycling carefree riff, and Stanley's almost tropical keyboard fills. But that vibe belies its words, alluding to political power grabs and Cold War doomsaying. His line about the walls coming tumbling down soon sounded prophetic. But one line was another chance for them to thumb their nose at the record company. The final 6.5-minute long version of Shout proved to be ungainly for radio, which resulted in a confrontation between Tears for Fears and Dave Bates. In the end, the decision was made to fade the song early rather than create a separate radio edit. But the conflict remains forever in one of the choruses of Everybody Wants to Rule the World. They now had their money songs. They just needed to take them to the bank. It took 2 weeks for the songs from The Big Chair to outsell The Hurting. In the UK, the album's release had been preceded by Mother's Talk in August 1984. And Shout at the end of November. Shout was denied a higher position than number 4 due to the joint efforts of Foreigner, Prince, Elaine Page and Barbara Dickson. In the US, their first single off The Big Chair was their drive time song, Everybody Wants to Rule the World. Though Tears for Fears never got a UK number 1 single, they would get 2 in the US, with both Rule the World and Shout topping the Billboard Hot 100. Not that it made Orzabel especially happy. We were number 1 in the States, and all I wanted was to go and do Primal Therapy. I went out for dinner with Ian Stanley, and he said to me, "Do you know how much money you've made?" And I was like, I don't fucking care. Because I didn't. I had this spiritual journey that I needed to complete. Their success in the US was buoyed by their videos on MTV and a seemingly never-ending tour, which due to the limitations of sequencer technology, was the exact same set without deviation for 144 shows. One show they didn't play in 1985 was Live Aid. Before they blew up in the States, they signed up but were dropped in favour of bigger acts. The week before their event, Tears for Fears had the number 1 album in the US and were re-added to the bill without their knowledge. So they said no and spent the day decompressing in Hawaii instead. Basically, we weren't into the whole event. I'm glad somebody has found a use for all the money that pop music makes. It's definitely an improvement on sending out good vibes all around the world and all that stuff. We did it our way. We donated the money from our concerts in London, Sydney, Tokyo and New York. That's our part. We didn't get to play in front of billions of people, which is the reason why an awful lot of groups appeared. It was also around this time that Tears for Fears met their hero, Arthur Janov, who'd been delighted with the group converting his work into pop music, and unfortunately confirmed the old adage for Smith. He proceeded to ask us whether we might be interested in writing a musical about primal therapy. At that point, I lost the plot. Basically, it was as if God had come down and said he wanted you to find ways to make him money. It would be like God taking sponsorship. I was destroyed after meeting Arthur Janov. After selling 4 million copies of The Big Chair in the US, Mercury wanted Tears for Fears to follow up as soon as possible. And again, that was not the Tears for Fears way. Not wanting to retread old ground, they spent the next 4 years working on The Seeds of Love, alongside Orzabel finally having the time and opportunity to do Primal Therapy. They went through 4 producers, 9 studios, and allegedly £1 million to complete it. After we recorded songs from The Big Chair, all round us there was a desire to recreate it. Everybody, except me and Kurt, felt we were onto a good thing. I couldn't see it that way. I believe to create you have to destroy. It's painful and difficult, but it's the only way it can work. It was another hit, but less so than songs from The Big Chair. Not only that, but after the album tour in 1991, Smith left Tears for Fears due to mounting tensions between the duo. Orzabel continued with the band name for 2 solo albums. They didn't talk for over a decade. However, Smith eventually returned in 2004, and they have released 2 albums since, with a new one just around the corner. Tears for Fears could claim to be the biggest band in the world for a few months of 1985, and their legacy persists due to new artists holding them up as an influence. There's many a synth-augmented guitar band. But there's also an impressively diverse collection of songs that sample their work.
Memories made in the coldest winter. Goodbye, my friend. Everybody here wants you, mother. It's Christmas time.
Richard Kelly's 2001 sci-fi teen period piece, Donnie Darko, also gained the band a new generation of fans, not only with its use of Head Over Heels, but also as Kelly was unable to afford his first choice of U2's MLK.
Sleep tonight.
Michael Andrews and Gary Jules' somber reworking of Mad World plays near the end of the film. Not only did it outdo The Darkness to get UK Christmas #1 in 2003, but it gave name to a pop cultural trope, to slow down an upbeat pop song, especially for a movie trailer. For example, Lorde Mad Worlded Everybody Wants to Rule the World for the Hunger Games Catching Fire soundtrack.
Everybody wants to rule the world.
Kurt Smith had one issue with the Mad World cover though. Gary Jules sang Enlarging Your World at one bit.
Enlarging your world.
But the correct lyric is actually Halagian World. Producer Chris Hughes had a running joke in the studio about this made up planet and a catchphrase, "Oh, that's so Halajian." I put it in the song, and it sounded right. Though it helped them through young adulthood, with life experience and having had kids themselves, Orzabal and Smith aren't as committed and evangelical about Janov's primal theories as they once were. Smith has noted that as soon as you see how much of yourself is already embedded in your child's personality at birth, the idea of them being a blank slate just feels wrong. But their songs, even those on The Hurting, transcend the worldview they were made under. Whether you need to let it all out, drive down the highway with the radio on, or sit in your bedroom observing the world below, Tears for Fears remain kinda funny, kinda sad. Thanks for watching. What's your favourite Tears for Fears song? Comment down below. If you like this video, like, subscribe, and why don't you also do me a favour and share it with a couple of people. It really does help. As always, I'd like to shout out this month's new top tier supporters over on Patreon, and Matthew Ussia, and thanks to everyone else that supports me. And I'll see you in several weeks' time for whatever's next.